of Ace Choir, we invite all of you to join us in this Rosary prayer, a journey for us throughout this month of May, a journey of prayer, a journey growing closer to Our Lady, to our Mother, and seeking her intercession, her guidance in our lives. We have initiated this daily Rosary prayer, which we will be doing every day before the virtual Holy Mass. Do join us for this prayer. Before we begin, it's a kind request to everyone participating to put your phones in silent mode. We'll begin with a small introduction. Saint Bernard says, God wills that all His gifts should come to us through Mary. It was in Rome towards the end of the 18th century, one fine evening in May. A child of the poor gathered his companions around him and led them to a statue of Mary, before which a lamp was burning, as is the custom in that holy city. There, these fresh young voices sang the litany of Our Lady. The next day, the little group, followed by other children, again gathered at the feet of the Mother of God. Next came their mothers to join the little assembly. Soon other groups were formed and the devotion rapidly became popular. Holy souls, troubled by the disorderly conduct which always increases and becomes graver at the return of the pleasant springtime, saw in these growing practices the hand of God, and they cooperated with the designs of Providence by approving and promoting this new devotion as a public and solemn act of reparation. The month of Mary was founded. This is the month in which, in the churches and individual homes, the most affectionate and fervent homage of prayers and devotions from the hearts of Christians are raised to Mary. It is also the month in which from His throne descend upon us the most generous and abundant gifts of the Divine Mercy. In our own times, we Catholics, wanting to be close to her always, offer her special presence in May, pilgrimages, visits to churches dedicated to her, little sacrifices in her honor, periods of study and well-finished work offered up to her, and a more attentive recitation of the Rosary. And especially at this time of COVID, when we are closed up in our homes, let us make this devotion not limited to ourselves, but extend it to our family members as well. And stay united with each and every Catholic all around the world, praying the Rosary.
Welcome all, and let's make sign of the cross.
In the
In the
name
name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen. We'll start with a song, Be With Us, Mary.
No man can live as an island, turning through life alone. Since
1. Mary, the Mother of God. When Blessed Virgin said yes freely to the plans revealed to her by the Creator, the Divine Word assumed a human nature, a rational soul and a body, which was formed in the most pure womb of Mary. The divine nature and the human were united in a single person, Jesus Christ, true God, and thenceforth true man, the only begotten and the eternal Son of the Father, and from that moment on, as man, the true Son of Mary. This is why Our Lady is the Mother of the Incarnate Word, of the second person of the Blessed Trinity, who has united our human nature to Himself forever, without any confusion of the two natures. The greatest praise we can give to the Blessed Virgin is to address her loudly and clearly by the name that expresses her very highest dignity, Mother of God. Let us offer to our Mother today with the belief, Mother of God, your petitions are most powerful.
Let's say the Apostles' Creed. I believe in God,
the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, His only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. He descended into hell. On the third day He rose again from the dead. He ascended into heaven, and is seated at the right hand
of God the Father Almighty.
From there He will come to judge the living and the dead. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. Amen.
Our Father,
Who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
thy kingdom come,
Thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen.
for faith, hope, and charity. Hail Mary,
Full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed are you amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary,
Full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary,
Full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
all glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
As today is Friday, and we'll have the sorrowful mystery. The first sorrowful mystery, the agony in the garden. In this mystery, we will be bringing our family. And while we think of our family, and while we are sitting doing this rosary, we need to see first at Mary's family. The family which added the flavor of divinity, of holiness. We can say the Holy Family. And this mystery, let's prepare ourselves. Let's bring our family, all the members in the family, especially the deceased one. The deceased one because they are not with us right now. But yes, we are still here. We are able to see each and everything. We can feel Lord's presence. We can feel the pain, suffering. And this is happening so that we can move towards holiness. O Mother of God, my mother, my Lord's mother, as we are starting this journey of Rosary, this first sorrowful mystery, we want to bring our family so that each and every family may have a consciousness of holiness. Each and every family may have a consciousness of becoming a holy family. For this we will be praying. Our Father,
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil.
Hail Mary,
Full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is thy fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
All glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
Mother of God, your petitions are most powerful. O my Jesus,
Forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those who are in the most need of thy mercy.
Mary, seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
Second sorrowful mystery, the scourging at the pillar. In this mystery, O Mama, especially pray for all the sick and suffering around the world, all those who are suffering a pain physically, mentally, spiritually. May they be able to also think about the pain that Jesus went through and how through that pain our Lord was glorified and many were saved. May they be able to endure that pain and suffering, and at this moment may they be able to seek your presence, O Mother, and also seek the presence of Jesus. Be with all the sick and suffering people present by their side, comfort them and help them, intercede for them so that they may be healed soon by the grace of God. And may this healing, may your presence lead them to experience God in their lives. For this I pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God,
pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God,
pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us
sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God,
pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God,
pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners,
now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit,
as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
O my Jesus,
Forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those who are in most need of thy mercy.
Mother of God, your petitions are most powerful. Mary, seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
Third sorrowful mystery, the crowning of thorns. Lord, we pray for all young children and young students, young brothers and sisters who are studying. Lord, those who are in their academic areas of life, those who are pursuing their education in some or the other field. Lord, it is no less than an apostolate for you, Lord. As during your agony, you were crowned with thorns on the forehead, and those thorns were pricking you hard. We pray for all those young minds who are pursuing their education, and in this duration, it is no less than pricking their minds each of these young minds. Our Father, who art in heaven,
Hallowed be thy name, thy
Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
Mother of God, your petitions are most powerful. O my Jesus,
Forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those in most need of thy mercy.
Mary, seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
Fourth sorrowful mystery, the carrying of the cross. In this mystery, we remember Jesus. Before carrying his cross, he was beaten, he was stripped off, he was mocked, and some of the soldiers even spat on him. This was the reality. In this mystery, I offer each and every person, those who have received the call, those who are discovering their call, and those who have known their vocation. Somewhere, these will be reality. That the road will be tough, sometimes unpredictable. Lord, I ask your grace so that by looking at these realities, we all might not run away. By seeing the worries, glitters, and cares of the world, we might not be attracted towards it, but respond to your call. As you embrace the cross, help us grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy
Holy
Mary,
Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners,
Now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
Mother of God, your petitions are most powerful. O my Jesus,
Forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those in most need of thy mercy.
Mary, seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
The fifth sorrowful mystery, the crucifixion of our Lord. In this mystery, Mama, please intercede for all those people, especially in India, who are persecuting people of other faiths, especially those of the Muslims, during this COVID situation. Lord, during the times of trials and temptations, you raise up prophets, you raise up people from the least of places, O Lord. And in this time, O Lord, please send your grace, especially Mama, please intercede for us, that through that intercession, we might be able to be saved, to be filled with the Holy Spirit, as were the apostles during the Pentecost. For all these intentions, we offer to your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, through you. Our Father,
Who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God,
for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God,
pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary,
Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end.
Amen.
Mother of God, your petitions are most powerful. O my Jesus,
Forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell, lead all souls to heaven, especially those who most in need of thy mercy.
may the seat of our wisdom.
Pray for us. Let's recite, Hail Holy Queen. Hail Holy Queen, Mother of mercy, hail our life, our sweetness, and our hope.
To thee do we cry, who are banished children of Eve. To thee do we send up our sighs, mourning and weeping in this valley of tears. Turn then, most gracious Advocate, thine eyes of mercy towards us, and after this our exile, show unto us the blessed fruit of thy womb, Jesus. O clement, O loving, O sweet Virgin Mary.
Amen. Let's all kneel down for the litany of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Lord have mercy.
Lord have mercy.
Christ have mercy.
Christ have mercy.
Lord have mercy.
Lord have mercy.
Christ hear us.
Christ graciously hear us.
God the Father of heaven,
Have mercy on us.
God the Son, Redeemer of the world,
Have mercy on us.
God the Holy Spirit,
Have mercy on us.
Holy Trinity, one God.
Have mercy on us.
Your response will be pray for us. Holy Mary,
Pray for us.
Holy Mother of God,
Pray for us.
Holy Virgin of Virgins,
Pray for us.
Mother of Christ,
Pray for us.
Mother of Divine Grace,
Pray for us.
Mother most pure,
Pray for us.
Mother most chaste,
Pray for us.
Mother inviolate,
Pray for us.
Mother undefiled,
Pray for us.
Mother most pure,
Pray for us.
Mother most amiable,
Pray for us.
Mother most admirable,
Pray for us.
Mother of good counsel,
Pray for us.
Mother of our Creator,
Pray for us.
Mother of our Savior,
Pray for us.
Virgin most prudent,
Pray for us.
Virgin most venerable,
Pray for us.
Virgin most renowned,
Pray for us.
Virgin most powerful,
Pray for us.
Virgin most merciful,
Pray for us.
Virgin most faithful,
Pray for us.
Mirror of justice,
Pray for us.
Seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
Cause of our joy,
Pray for us.
Spiritual vessel,
Pray for us.
Vessel of honor,
Pray for us.
Singular vessel of devotion,
Pray for us.
Mystical rose,
Pray for us.
Tower of David,
Pray for us.
Tower of ivory,
Pray for us.
House of gold,
Pray for us.
Ark of of the covenant,
pray for us.
gate of heaven,
Pray for us.
morning star,
Pray for us.
health of the sick,
Pray for us.
refuge of sinner,
Pray for us.
comforter of the afflicted,
Pray for us.
help of Christians,
Pray for us.
queen of angels,
Pray for us.
queen of patriarchs,
Pray for us.
queen of prophets,
Pray for us.
queen of apostles,
Pray for us.
queen of martyrs,
Pray for us.
queen of confessors,
Pray for us.
queen of virgins,
Pray for us.
queen of all saints,
Pray for us.
queen conceived without original sin,
Pray for us.
queen assumed into heaven,
Pray for us.
queen of the most holy rosary,
Pray for us.
queen of peace.
Pray for us.
Your response will be, spare us, O Lord. Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world,
Spare us, O Lord.
your response will be, graciously hear us, O Lord. Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world,
Graciously hear us, O Lord.
your response will be, have mercy on us. Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world,
Have mercy on us,
pray for us, O Holy Mother of God.
that we may be made worthy of the promises of Christ.
Let us all pray.
Grant, we beseech thee, O Lord God, that we, thy servants, may enjoy perpetual health of mind and body, and by the glorious intercession of the Blessed Virgin, ever Virgin, be delivered from present sorrow, and enjoy eternal happiness through Christ our Lord. Amen.
We'll say the Memorare. Remember,
O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession was left unaided. Inspired with this confidence, I fly to thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my Mother. To thee do I come, before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me. Amen.
this is a special prayer by Pope Francis during this time of pandemic, COVID-19. Let's all see this prayer. O Mary,
You shine continuously on our journey as a sign of salvation and hope. We entrust ourselves to you, help of the sick, who at the foot of the cross were united with Jesus' suffering and persevered in your faith. Protectress of the Roman people, you know our needs, and we know that we will provide, so that, as at Cana in Galilee, joy and celebration may return after this time of trial. Help us, Mother of Divine Love, to conform ourselves to the will of the Father and to do what Jesus tells us. For he took upon himself our suffering and burdened himself with our sorrows to bring us to the cross, to the joy of the resurrection. Amen.
Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit,
as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
Virgin Mary,
Pray for us.
Saint Joseph,
Pray for us.
Saint Josemaria Escriva,
Pray for us.
Saint Faustina,
Pray for us.
Saint Mother Teresa,
Pray for us.
Saint John Paul II.
Pray for us.
Let's make sign of the cross.
In the name of Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, friends, for joining us for this Rosary, a journey in this month, and we expect that you'll be joining us till the last day of this month of May. And today we regret that we started late. So the plan is like this: we'll start the Rosary at 5 and it will be followed by the evening virtual Holy Mass. So please be with us, and sometimes it may happen that our live programs, it may get delayed. So bear with us patiently for 10 to 15 minutes and pray that we can go live. So we'll be having the virtual Holy Mass soon, after maybe one small song. So we welcome each and everyone, those who are watching right now.
Good evening, friends. Ace Choir welcomes you to this virtual Holy Mass. This Mass was celebrated in the Archdiocese of Toronto by Father Michael. Before beginning the Mass, I request all of you to keep your phones in silent mode. Thank you. Let's make sign of the cross.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Let's all rise for entrance hymn.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. The grace and peace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of the Father, the friendship of the Holy Spirit be with you all.
And with your spirit.
Welcome to the celebration of the daily televised Mass on this feast of Saint Joseph the Worker. My name is Father Michael Coots. The televising of this Mass is made possible by a contribution from 3 donors. The first is B. Tenier from Oshawa, Ontario, in loving memory of her son, Darko. The second are the members of the Knights of Columbus of St. John the Baptist Parish in Estevan, Saskatchewan, for vocations to the priesthood and religious life, and for all healthcare workers and COVID-19 victims. The third is an anonymous donor from Mississauga, Ontario, for the return to the faith of some family members, safety and protection for her children and grandchildren, for the repose of the souls of the family members, for refugees and marginalized in the society. Our thanks go out to the donors for the gift of this Mass. As you know, during this week we are praying for vocations. The most common and the most prolific vocation is the vocation to married life and a few single life witnesses within our faith community. And to serve these vocations, you have the vocation to the priesthood and religious life. Religious life is brothers, sisters, and priests who consecrate themselves to God. The word vocation comes from the Latin vocare, which means to call. And you and I are called during this Eucharist to turn away from sin and be faithful to God. You were sent to heal the contrite of heart. Lord, have mercy.
Lord, have mercy.
You came to call sinners. Christ, have mercy.
Christ, have mercy.
You plead for us at the right hand of the Father. Lord, have mercy.
Lord, have mercy.
May Almighty God have mercy on us, forgive us our sins, and bring us to everlasting life.
Amen.
Let us now praise God during this feast of Saint Joseph. Let us pray. O God, creator of all things, who laid down for the human race the law of work, graciously grant that by the example of Saint Joseph and under his patronage, we may complete the works you set us to do and attain the rewards of your promise through Christ our Lord.
Amen. In today's first reading, we will get to know about the conversion of Saul to Paul.
First reading from the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 9, verses 1 to 20. Meanwhile, Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if he found any who belonged to the way, men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. Now, as he was going along and approaching Damascus, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" He asked, "Who are you, Lord?" The reply came, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But get up and enter the city, and you will be told what you are to do." The men who were traveling with him stood speechless because they heard the voice but saw no one. Saul got up from the ground, and though his eyes were open, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. For 3 days he was without sight, and neither ate nor drank. Now there was a disciple in Damascus named Ananias. The Lord said to him in a vision, "Ananias?" He answered, "Here I am, Lord." The Lord said to him, "Get up and go to the street called Straight, and at the house of Judas look for a man of Tarsus named Saul. At this moment he is praying, and he has seen in a vision a man named Ananias come in and lay his hands on him, so that he might regain his sight." But Ananias answered, "Lord, I have heard from many about this man, how much evil he has done to your saints in Jerusalem. And here he has authority from the chief priests to bind all who invoke your name." But the Lord said to him, "Go, for he is an instrument whom I have chosen to bring my name before Gentiles and kings and before the people of Israel. I myself will show him how much he must suffer for the sake of my name." So Ananias went and entered the house. He laid his hands on Saul and said, "Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on your way here, has sent me, so that you may regain your sight and be filled with the Holy Spirit." And immediately something like scales fell from his eyes, and his sight was restored. Then he got up and was baptized, and after taking some food, he regained his strength. For several days he was with disciples. He was with the disciples in Damascus, and immediately he began to proclaim Jesus in the synagogues, saying, "He is the Son of God." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Tell the good news.
and the faithfulness of the Lord endures forever. Go to all the world and tell the good news. Let's all rise for acclamation. In today's Gospel reading, we'll hear about true food and true drink.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you.
The Jews disputed among themselves, saying, "How can this man give us his flesh to eat?" So Jesus said to them, "Very truly, I tell you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink of his blood, you have no life in you. Those who eat my flesh and drink my blood have eternal life, and I will raise them up on the last day. For my flesh is true food, and my blood is true drink. Those who eat my flesh and drink my blood abide in me, and I in them. Just as the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so whoever eats me will live because of me. This is the bread that came down from heaven, not like that which your ancestors ate and died. But the one who eats this bread will live forever." Jesus said these things while he was teaching in the synagogue at Capharnaum. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
We all know the story of the mystery of the Annunciation, when the angel came to Mary and said, "Would you be the mother of the Most High?" It was a definite call from God, and we had a definite answer from Mary. "Be it done to me according to your will." Today on the feast of Saint Joseph, we don't hear that call, but the Saint Joseph was actually called. We don't hear his answer. In fact, we don't hear a word of Saint Joseph. But we know how he lived out his call as being the foster father and the guardian, the husband of Mary and the guardian of the child Jesus. This week we are speaking about vocations to religious life. Vocations to a religious brother, religious sister, to a religious priest. It is said that God does not know two things. The first is what a Jesuit thinks and what is he going to do next. And secondly, how many orders and congregations of nuns there are throughout the world. And in that sense, I'm like God, I have no idea. The two orders of nuns that influenced my life were the Canossian sisters, who taught my mother and my aunts and gave them the values in life, and therefore indirectly gave me values in my own life. And then my aunts would teach in similar at the schools of the Loretto sisters. And whenever they came home, they were always talking about how wonderful these sisters were. And so I had a great respect and love for them, and I began to realize that these sisters Not only the Lorettos and the Canossians, but sisters in general are the beating heart of the church in our world today, and they are in the front line of everything, and unfortunately not acknowledged. Because of them, we have schools today here in Canada, schools and hospitals and orphanages. We have people taking care of women in the street and abused people, thanks to the sisters. When I think about the sisters, I think about they are the people who dream the impossible dream. They are the brave people who dare to go where the brave dare not go. They are the ones who reach for the impossible star. And therefore, they are the heart of our church today. When you come to the religious brothers, the late Bishop Attila Miklosiazi would say, the brothers embody the core or the spirit of the order or the congregation. They're not praised for baptisms and marriages and funerals, but they are there to help and to push forward the vocation of a priest. Coming to religious orders, the oldest and the most venerable are the Benedictines of over 15 centuries. Their main motto was ora et labora, to pray and to work. We also know about the Franciscans and the Dominicans, to name just a few. And here in Canada, the Oblates of Mary Immaculate are the ones who do the wonderful work in the Northern Territories of Canada. When Mike Walsh asked me, Deacon Mike Walsh asked me, he says, how would you describe your vocation? I would say, I was born in Bombay, buttered in Guyana, bred in Guyana, and buttered in Canada. I did not have, like but Dan Smith read in our first reading, a vocation just like a conversion, just like St. Paul. I was not knocked down after living in the fast lane with wine, women, and song. I came from a poor family, but very rich in love, devout and devoted parents. And so when I asked my mother what should I join, whether I should join the diocesan priesthood or the Jesuits, she said, without doubt, join the Jesuits. They take long in preparation, and you're a slow learner. Something will stick to you. In 1959, there were 7 of us SMOBs, St. Mary's Old Boys, who joined the religious order. There were 3 of us who were between the ages of 16 and 17, and the other 4 were not that much older. 60 years later, we are 4 in the Jesuit order and priests. When I joined, I decided I want to save my soul and save the souls of others. And then gradually I began to realize it was what our cantor, Cara, sang. Go out to the whole world and proclaim the good news. And I was hoping that as I preached, there would be instant conversions like instant coffee. But somebody told me, he says, remember, when I come to Guyana, God has already been there before you come. And God will be there when you leave. Never take yourself too seriously. And these are the things that remain with me as I worked in Guyana. They shaped me. They began to show me what it was to be compassionate and kind and to reach out to others. They always asked me to do the extra, because that is what God wants you to do. Gradually, my life changed from just saving my souls and the souls of others to realizing it was a personal relationship with God. And it was this that I came to give my life to. God bless you all. Would you now pray with me? Heavenly Father, during this week of Masses for the prayer for vocations, we offer you these prayers. We pray for teens and young people that they may overcome fear of unworthiness and truly consider the vocation to the priesthood or religious life. We pray to the Lord. That the example of religious sisters and brothers may attract many young people to give their lives to Jesus. We pray to the Lord. That parents and grandparents have the grace to guide their children through their trials of life and help them to discern not just their careers, but also their vocations. we pray to the Lord.
Lord, hear our prayer.
God, our loving Father, send workers into your great harvest so that the gospel is preached, that the poor are served with love, and the suffering are comforted, and your people strengthened by the sacraments. We make this prayer through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Be this lowly bread and wine, be the sacrifice divine of our Savior Jesus Christ, of our Savior Jesus Christ. All this labor can produce, you have given for our use. Take, O Lord, our offering. Take, O Lord, our offering. May this lowly bread and wine be the sacrifice divine of our Savior Jesus Christ, of our Savior Jesus Christ. On this gift of bread and wine, offer sacrifice a sign. Father, look with favor now. Father, look with favor now. May this lowly bread and wine be the sacrifice divine of our Savior Jesus Christ, of our Savior Jesus Christ.
Pray, my sisters, my brothers, that my sacrifice and yours may be acceptable to God, the Almighty Father.
May the Lord accept the sacrifice in your hands, for the praise and glory of His name, for our good and good of all His holy church.
God, fount of all mercy, look upon our offerings which we bring before your majesty in commemoration of Saint Joseph, and mercifully grant that the gifts we offer may become the means of protection for those who call upon you, through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
The Lord be with you.
And with yours,
Lift up your hearts.
we lift them up to the Lord.
Let us give thanks to the Lord our God.
It is right and
It is truly right and just, our duty and our salvation, always and everywhere, to give you thanks, Lord, Holy Father, Almighty and Eternal God, and on the commemoration of Saint Joseph, to glorify you and bless you. For this just man was given by you as the spouse of the Virgin Mother of God, and set as a wise and faithful servant in charge of your household, to watch like a father over your only begotten Son, who was conceived by the overshadowing of the Holy Spirit, our Lord Jesus Christ. Through him the angels praise your majesty, heaven and virtues of heaven and the blessed seraphim worship together with exaltation. May our voices join with them as we sing.
God will lift up your name.
indeed holy, O Lord, the fount of all holiness. Make holy, therefore, these gifts, we pray, by sending down your Spirit upon them like the dewfall, so that they may become for us the body and blood of our Lord Jesus Christ. At the time he was betrayed and entered willingly into his passion, he took bread and giving thanks, broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take this, all of you, and eat of it, for this is my body which will be given up for you."
My Lord, my God.
In a similar way, when supper was ended, he took the chalice. Once more giving thanks, he gave the chalice to his disciples, saying, "Take this, all of you, and drink from it, for this is the chalice of my blood, the blood of the new and eternal covenant, which will be poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. Do this in memory of me."
My Lord, my God.
The mystery of faith.
We proclaim your death, O Lord, and profess your resurrection until you come again.
Therefore, as we celebrate the memorial of his death and resurrection, we offer you, Lord, the bread of life and the chalice of salvation, giving thanks that you have held us worthy to be in your presence and minister to you. Humbly we pray that partaking of the body and blood of Christ, we may be gathered into one by the Holy Spirit. Remember, Lord, your church spread throughout the world. Bring her to the fullness of charity, together with Francis our Pope, Thomas our Bishop, bishops across Canada, and all the clergy. Remember also our brothers and sisters who have fallen asleep in the hope of the resurrection, and all who have died in your mercy. Welcome them into the light of your face. Have mercy on us all, that with the Blessed Virgin Mary, Mother of God, with blessed Joseph, her spouse, with the blessed apostles and all the saints who have pleased you throughout the ages, we may merit to be co-heirs to eternal life, and may praise and glorify you through your Son, Jesus Christ. Through him, with him, and in him, O God, Almighty Father, in the unity of the Holy Spirit, all glory and honor is yours forever and ever.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
At the Saviour's command, informed by divine teaching, we now dare to say,
Our Father,
Who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil.
deliver us, Lord, from every evil. Graciously grant peace in our day, that by the help of your mercy we may be always free from sin, safe from all distress, as we await the blessed hope and the coming of our Savior, Jesus Christ.
For the
For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever. Lord Jesus Christ, you said to your apostles, "Peace I leave you, my peace I give you. Look not on our sins, but on the faith of this your church, and graciously grant her peace and unity in accordance with your will, who live and reign forever and ever."
Amen.
The peace of the Lord be with you always.
And with your
At
spirit.
this moment, take an opportunity to send a message of peace to those around you.
Lamb of God,
You take away the sin of the world. Have mercy on us. Lamb of God, you take away the sin of the world. Have mercy on us. Lamb of God, you take away the sin of the world. Grant us peace.
Behold the Lamb of God, behold him who takes away the sins of the world. Blessed are those who are called to the supper of the Lamb. Lord, I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof, but only say the word, and my soul shall be healed. May the body and blood of Christ bring us all to everlasting life.
Since we cannot receive the Holy Communion, let us remember our first Holy Communion and best movement when we received the body and blood of Christ. Remembering that, let us partake in the spiritual communion by saying this prayer. O Immaculate Queen of heaven and earth, Mother of God and mediator of every grace, I believe that your dearly beloved Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, is truly, really, and substantially contained in the most holy sacrament. I love him above all things and long to receive him in my heart, since now I cannot receive him sacramentally. Be so good to place him spiritually in my soul, and never permit me to be separated from him. Amen. I, the Lord of sea and sky, Let us say the prayer after communion of St. Thomas. I thank you, Lord, Almighty Father, everlasting God, for having been pleased, through no merit of mine, but of your great mercy alone, to feed me, a sinner, and your unworthy servant, with the precious body and blood of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. I pray that this Holy Communion may not be for my judgment and condemnation, but for my pardon and salvation. Let this Holy Communion be to me an armor of faith and a shield of goodwill, a cleansing of all vices and a rooting out of all evil desires. May it increase love and patience, humility and obedience, and all virtues. May it be a firm defense against the evil designs of all my visible and invisible enemies, a perfect quieting of all the desires of soul and body. May this Holy Communion bring about a perfect union with you, the one true God, and at last enable me to reach eternal bliss when you will call me. I pray that you bring me, a sinner, to the indescribable feast, where you, with your Son and the Holy Spirit, are to your saints true light, full blessedness, everlasting joy, and perfect happiness, through the same Christ our Lord. Amen. Let us say a prayer for priest of Saint Therese. O Jesus, eternal priest, keep your priest within the shelter of your sacred heart, where none may touch them. Keep unstained their anointed hands, which daily touch your sacred body. Keep unsullied their lips, daily purpled with your precious blood. Keep pure and unearthly their hearts, sealed with the sublime mark of the priesthood. Let your holy love surround them and shield them from the world's contagion. Bless their labors with abundant fruit, and may the souls to whom they minister be their joy and consolation, here and in heaven, their beautiful and everlasting crown. Amen.
Let us pray. Having fed upon heavenly delights, we humbly ask you, O Lord, that by Saint Joseph's example, cherishing in our hearts the sign of your love, we may ever enjoy the fruit of perpetual peace, through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
May Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
The Mass has been celebrated. Go in the peace of Christ. Alleluia, alleluia.
Thanks be to God.
Alleluia, alleluia. Son of God, you called us to your table. Son of God, in you we are made one. Lord Jesus Christ, take us by the hand. Lord Jesus Christ, be with us today. Son of God, you leave us not alone. Son of God, in you we trust and hope. Lord Jesus Christ, take us by the hand. Lord Jesus Christ, stay with us today. Son of God, you guide our path with love. Son of God, you make our mind alive. Lord Jesus Christ, take us by the hand. Lord Jesus Christ, stay with us today. Almighty Father, thank you, Lord, that we are able to do this Mass. Thank you, Lord, for this day that you have given to all of us. Help us, Lord, that whenever, Lord, we are getting a call, give us the strength, give us that we may respond, that as Mother Mary responded, Be it done to me according to thy will. Help us, Lord, that we may also respond as Mother Mary responded to you, to your call, God. For this we pray, our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Hallowed be this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, God, from evil. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary,
Full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. We'll say the Memorare together. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession, was left unaided. Inspired with this confidence, I fly to thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my Mother. To thee do I come. Before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me. Amen. O Queen of heaven, rejoice now. Alleluia. Rejoice, for he who married though despair. Alleluia. He is risen as he foretold. Alleluia. Pray for us to the Father. Alleluia. Rejoice and be glad, O Virgin Mary. Alleluia. For the Lord has truly risen. Alleluia. Let us pray. O God, you deign to give joy to the world through the resurrection of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. Grant, we beseech you, that through his mother, the Virgin Mary, we may obtain the joys of everlasting life. Through the same Christ our Lord. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
Virgin Mary,
Pray for us.
Saint Joseph,
Pray for us.
Saint Faustina,
Pray for us.
Saint Jose Maria Escriva,
Pray for us.
Saint Paul.
Pray for us.
Let's make sign of the cross in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you, friends, for joining us in this virtual Holy Mass. Have a blessed week. Stay safe and take precautions.
Since we have entered the month of May, ACE Choir has also initiated to do the Rosary every day before the virtual Holy Mass. Do join us for the Holy Rosary before the virtual Holy Mass at 5 o'clock, and offer your each and every intention, and let us also pray that through the recitation of the Holy Rosary, may we build a stronger Our Lady, with His Son, and the Blessed Trinity. Thank you.